100%, 100%.
So let's get this started. Welcome back. I'm Sarth Dowle, your host for the content. As mentioned earlier, we have a phenomenal panel waiting for you. Before beginning, I would like to just reiterate how much we appreciate all the support and guidance from our teachers and mentors and the support staff at Narsi Monji College of Commerce and Economics, Mumbai, India. I would like to specifically thank Dr. Asgaonkar sir, our principal, Dr. Nirmala ma'am, our vice principal, Dr. Vaishali Davar ma'am, the convener for intent. We are also grateful to Professor Sneha ma'am and Professor Prarna ma'am, the co-conveners for intent. My special thanks to our insightful speakers, our audience, and Team Intent, as well as Team International Relations. That said, let's begin with a panel discussion. To introduce the panelists and the moderator, here is Riddhi.
Attention Space Geeks, I'm Riddhi Gosalia, and lined up we have the most awaited panel discussion, the Space Economy 2021 Annual Update, India's role in the 460 billion space economy, where we will be looking at the various developments taking place in the sector, its future outlook, and much more. Joining us today are three exceptional personalities for whom we are filled with immense gratitude for being a part of this conference. Our first panelist, Mr. George Pullen, is a free market economist who, for the last decade, has been refining his economic philosophies as a senior economist at the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission in Washington, D.C. He is driven by a curiosity and passion for convergence, connecting people and ideas across diverse disciplines and finding new questions that need answers. Prior to joining the CFTC and launching the Milky Way Economy LLC, Mr. Pullen learned his craft serving as an executive, a banker, broker, hedge fund trader, economist, and lecturer. He is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University and New Hampshire School of Law. Our next panelist, Mr. Samson Williams, is a serial entrepreneur and accidental investor. He is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University in New York City and University of New Hampshire School of Modern Law, where he teaches on blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and the space economy. Mr. Williams is also president of Crowdfunding Professional Association, an investor into two investment crowdfunding platforms, Bright.us and GoingPublic.com. Moderating this session, we have Ms. Parna Sarkar Basu, who serves as a strategic advisor to transformational leaders and tech pioneers and helps them launch and reinvent companies globally. A brand architect, Ms. Basu also designs powerful programs to spotlight entrepreneurs and innovators and elevate startup founders to industry thought leaders. Recipient of multiple awards, she has propelled tech companies into innovation leaders in highly competitive markets, from artificial intelligence and enterprise software to robots and consulting services. She is a Forbes and Boston Business Journal contributor and serves on the board of Women Technology International and the American Marketing Association Boston. We are very happy to have you moderating today, ma'am. So let us begin without further ado. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the whole team for inviting us here today. I'm really excited to have a great conversation with George and Samson. And good evening to all of you here. I actually forgot to ask you, Riddhi, can people ask questions or put their comments in the chat?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so to everybody, feel free to post your comments and chats, questions, whatever you want to talk to us about. All right, so let's get started. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I just want to start by saying that I've had the absolute privilege of working with some amazing founders and technology companies and launched like dozens of really cool products, both here and abroad. I got interested in space tech when we got to meet Sally Ride, like many years ago in Boston, because I took my daughter to meet her and because I wanted her to know that that the world is an oyster and she can be anybody she wants to be. even though I knew that astronauts are like, not too many of them are out there. But I've been extremely interested in space tech forever. And look at where we are today, from just a handful of elite astronauts to we are now talking about space travel, and maybe it might even become a reality in this lifetime. Who knows? We just have to make a lot more millions to get us there. Why don't we start with, let me ask you, Samson, let's start there. How did you get interested in space tech, space economy?
I blame George for that countless hours of therapy that have come from this. So we teach at University of New Hampshire School of Law, a blockchain cryptocurrency in the law program. And I was off trying to calculate how much a pomegranate costs on Mars. Because if you go to Mars, you have a different economic model. Because if we're on Mars, you have some tea, I have some mangoes, George has $1 billion, only two of us have anything of value. Because what are you going to do with money on Mars? Probably nothing. But you have tea and I have mangoes, so we can come up with a different way of exchanging values. Meanwhile, George is saying, "Hey, look, I have all this paper." I'm like, that probably weighed so much. You spent more money shipping it out here than it's worth, because there's no paper in space. It's all digital. And so while I was busy trying to calculate or determine the economics of a Martian, the particulars of a Martian economy, George was bothering me about the space economy. And so we went to the Air and Space Museum here in Washington, D.C. And then we talked about, he explained, hey, this is the fifth industrial revolution, the space economy. And it's a lot easier to understand when there's a 120-foot rocket behind you. You're like, oh, the space industry guys build the rocket, but the space economy is what is the function the rocket helps enable. And so that's how I got into space in the space economy. I do want to pause for a moment and pitch it over to George, because he has to give a disclaimer. Otherwise, he'll get yelled at. Go, George.
Yes, good morning. I'll give my disclaimer very quickly. We can move on. So my disclaimer is that today I'm only speaking in my personal and academic capacities. I am not speaking as a senior government official, as a senior economist for the CFTC. So any comments are my own and do not reflect any comments or feelings or views of the US government, any of senior officials that I may or may not work with, and my agency and its directors. Thanks.
Now, partner, you can ask him any question he can answer.
Okay. Thanks for that, Samson. George, now why don't you tell us how you have an interesting background too. So share with us how you got into the space economy.
Sure. So a long time ago in a galaxy far away, my dad took my mom on their first date to go see Star Wars. And so it was pretty much inevitable that I would grow up to be in love with space and the space economy. On a more serious note, I have always been a student of economics because I find that economics allows me to frame and better understand people's behavior and forecast the way that we interact with our larger society, with businesses, and with each other. And so I've always been fascinated by the field. I have covered alternative markets, which I will define as markets not on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, or Bloomberg, but markets that tend to go bump in the night and only end up being shiny once certain billionaires get interested in it. I have always enjoyed these types of markets, so I have a past as a banker. I worked at a hedge fund as a trader and a partner. I've also done risk analysis and forecasting work for a number of firms, in addition to, as previously mentioned, my role as a senior economist with the US government. So I've always been interested in alternative markets. And I believe that if we look at what's happening right now, I believe that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. Most economists will tell us that 5 or 10 years from now. That's how it works. And any of the business and economic students know that's how it works. We have a tendency not to call things as it's happening. So what I've done is I've tried to look beyond that to figure out what the fourth industrial revolution is enabling. And it is my feeling that if you look at the I break the fourth industrial revolution that we're currently going through into 4 parts, by the way. So just to level set there. So we have our biotech and our healthcare sector, which is taking off and seeing exponential growth. We have our fintech advancements. We have our big data and automation advancements. And then our fourth one is around new energy. And of course, the way that we're looking to combat climate change and decarbonize. Those are the 4 big technology advancements and technology frontiers that are today. If you extend out your thinking on all 4 of those, each has applications in the 5th industrial revolution, which will be the space economy. And I'm really excited to be part of it, to be teaching on it and talking on with you today.
Oh, fascinating. And in the world of tech, we call that the industry 4.0, everything that you just talked about. So yeah, it's all interconnected for sure. So let's dive into the industry then. So currently, we hear that it is a $350 billion industry, but a recent Morgan Stanley report talked about this industry growing to over $1 trillion. I think zeros don't mean any much right now, right? But so 1 trillion by 2040, which is great. I mean, we can keep adding more zeros to that. But what do you think are the triggers that's helping to take this industry forward and make space so interesting to the general public, so to speak?
So I'm gonna tackle this first and pitch it over to George. He's gonna bore you with some numbers. The space economy right now. Yeah, more zeros. The space economy right now is around 460 billion US. I have no idea what that translates out into lakhs or rupees, but it's a lot. So when we first started our book in 2020, the space economy was around 400 billion. It's gotten $60 billion worth more value. And so in order to understand that, we got to use our super high tech explainer here. This is a rocket. Congratulations. I'm about to break down the space economy so everyone understands what it is. So the rockets are part of launch. So that's the first part of the space economy. Everyone loves the rockets. They're big, they're controlled explosions, right? The billionaires are like, hey, look at my hot rod, look at my fancy new vehicle. It's not necessarily a Mustang or a Tesla or a Lexus or a Maserati, it's a rocket. So they're all very excited about this. Humans love the rockets. The only purpose of these rockets is so that they can go into space and deploy satellites. So that's the second part of the space economy, which is called InStream. And satellites, they go around the Earth providing data communications, some form of commercial surveillance or other type of surveillance. And all these satellites do is they stream down data. That's where actually the money's at. Elon Musk needed to build rockets to deploy satellite arrays, and satellite arrays are just a bunch of satellites that are in the night sky to collect the data that makes modern day business possible. So those are the 3 big elements of the space economy. You have launch, in-stream, and then downstream is all the data. So many people are like, oh, how are we involved in the space economy? If you're a data scientist, if you're working on climate change, if you're working on global warming, if you're working with anything with a global positioning satellite, with supply chain shipping, the airline industry, tourism, you're 100% part of the space economy. If you check the weather, probably came from a satellite. And so those are the first big parts of the space economy. Upstream, launch, in-stream, satellite, downstream, data. And so the fourth part of the space economy is exploration. We're getting away from the moon, Mars, we're going to Uranus and other places. Why? Because they exist and we're sort of curious about that. And then the fifth part of the space economy, which is often overlooked, is the role of religion in the space economy. And that's for the bigger ticket, but the bigger budget items, because it's to address, why are humans here? Why do we exist? Where do we come from? People often don't think about the role of religion in the space economy, but part of the reason we're going to explore is to understand our position in the universe as a whole. So I wanted to lay that down. George is going to bother you with some numbers, but the space economy is worth about $460 billion. George, take it away.
So here's some numbers, which I promise I will not make boring. Well, I'll try anyway. So 460 billion might not get people, 460 billion US might not get people too excited. But what I would encourage them to think about is that the report, and partner, you rightly cited it, where Morgan Stanley has pegged it at maybe $1 trillion by the 2030s, is actually at the low end of many, many estimates. So if you look at other reports from the likes of Goldman or Bank of America, or even the Chinese Space Agency, they have calculations that pushed out to either 5, and in some cases 10 trillion by the year 2050. If you think about an economic area of activity over our heads, which is generating between $5 and $10 trillion worth of growth, that is the equivalent of an entire continent in orbit. So just like we have economic relationships with South America, Africa, and Australia, you're talking about an entire continent, another Australia of economic activity in space. And when we talk about in space, as we look forward, the very fancy rocket ship that Samson had, the marker, I only have a pen, those costs are coming way down. As those costs come way down, one of the things that Parna had talked about is how important it was for her to take her daughter to meet with Astronaut Sally Ride. One of the things around that is we have to keep in mind that there's only been a little over 500, actually getting close to 600 now, people ever, humans ever in space. My prediction and my forecast is in the next 10 years, we will have 500 people or more at a time in space. So all time around 500 and all the time over 500. That doesn't even take into account how development on the moon might go, particularly if we see a race among competitors to have more people and more resources being established on the moon. So you could even see a situation where we have that many again on the moon. If you think about what that means, you think about how that breaks down is it comes from expansion of the affordability of our launch, the development of not just satellites for the in-stream portion of the space economy, but also the deployment of numerous new space stations. There are over a half a dozen firms right now working on their versions of commercial space stations. Many of them even talk about the future where we have industrial parks in space. What that means with that access is we could have anywhere from 6 to a dozen space stations in orbit with people working on them on a regular basis for the next 10 years. That'll have impacts on a variety of businesses that you might be looking to work in or might already be working in yourselves. If you think about what that means for fintech, that likely means additional processing of information in space and the gathering that information for advanced financial modeling. Think about what that means for big data and automation. That is the collection of additional information, but also likely we will have a lot of drones and other types of robots that are telecontrolled from Earth on these stations in addition to the humans. Think about what that means for biotech and healthcare. There is a variety of things that we can do in low and zero gravity around protein folding, around advancements for the generation of organs and skin and everything that we can't do here. And also if you think about new energy, the universe, especially with our wonderful sun, is awash with virtually free and abundant, constant space-based solar power. I do think that'll be part of our green energy evolution, in addition to the advancements in battery technology that all of these space advancements require and then enable us to also take advantage of here on Earth. So putting that all together, you see how we get from where we are today, which is a little under $500 million, to a future in our lifetimes where we're talking about anywhere from 5 to 10 trillion of economic activity. And that's exciting. Those are big numbers that are worth paying attention to.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, the opportunities are huge right now. And like you were saying, there are so many companies, the larger companies are looking to, leverage their technology to help, get people to space, have a community. And then there is a lot of startups. I think that's where I see personally a lot of the newer ideas are coming up. So one of the companies here in Boston, they're actually looking at, it's an ag tech company, and they're actually looking at growing vegetables in space, right? Because right now, I think it's only potatoes and spinach is all you can get. Like you need more than that to survive. There is another company that's looking at fueling stations in space because of the intergalactic, travels that's going to come up. So yeah, there is just so much opportunities there.
I think that's a wonderful point. That's a wonderful point you bring up around how farm tech has crossroads into advancements in the space economy, because not only are farmers now using advanced satellite data and imagery to decrease the amount of chemicals and pesticides they need to apply to their crops, which is both good for Mother Earth, but also helps the farmers save money. They're doing that based on satellite data, but also the other side of farm tech is what you just mentioned, which is the techniques that we have for both growing with hydroponics and aeroponics. So those are growth techniques revolving water circulation and air circulation, absent soil, and also vertical farming. All these different really cool farm tech things, which is a separate passion of mine. But you're correct. You're so correct. They all have inroads into the space economy. They all have inroads into feeding all the people that will be on these space stations. Maybe even feeding some of the space tourists if that ends up taking off too.
Samson, I saw you shaking your head. What's
Oh,
up?
no. George is he's from a part of America called Maine. They have a lot of trees and stuff. So he's always outside wandering around in the forest. But it is important because I forget the UN report. The name of it came out in 2017. It says we had 57 harvests left, meaning the topsoil was being either contaminated through saltwater intrusion or just runoff. The nutrients in the soil was running off, so we had to protect our formable land. And so this is when we talk about vertical farming, urban farming, getting people to have plants like this ivy. It's not necessarily a form, but it's during the pandemic, just happy to talk to some other living creature. We'll see where this technology that is built for space is applied right here on the ground. And the larger, bigger picture of that for any of the students who are thinking about, I don't want to be an aerospace engineer. That's awesome, first off. Your role in the space economy is this. When you solve for space, you solve for Earth. And so many people think, hey, the billionaires are going to leave Earth. We're going somewhere else. Spaceship Earth is amazing. It's not to scale, by the way. Spaceship Earth is amazing. It's traveling around the Milky Way galaxy is going about 1.2 million miles through the universe. It's speeding, it's traveling. Earth is going about 500,000 miles per hour. The reason Spaceship Earth is so amazing is, one, you've never thought of Earth as a spaceship, but we are moving through the galaxy. So 250 million years ago, the dinosaurs, when they looked up, they saw different constellations. Why? They're on the other side of the Milky Way. So the Milky Way galaxy is moving. We are moving through the Milky Way. This is a spaceship. It's self-contained. It's got this amazing protective bubble around it. It's got its own atmosphere, and it's such an advanced spaceship, you don't even feel the gravity of it going this 500,000 miles per hour. So when you solve for space, you're solving for Spaceship Earth. So it's not that we're going to develop the technologies to run off, terraform the moon or Mars. We're going to develop those technologies, then beta test them right here on Spaceship Earth. So when we're looking at, hey, how do we do carbon capture? We're developing carbon capture plants. There's one that just got built in Iceland called Orca, ORCA. And so it's able to draw carbon from the atmosphere and put it into the earth in situ and store it. Right now, this is just one tiny plant that has a fraction of the impact needed. If we actually want to change This is how you address global warming. If you want to address global warming and climate change, you've got to suck down billions of metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere every year. That's not an aerospace engineering job. That's someone who's interested in, hey, I'm a STEM student, science, technology, engineering, math. And of course, let's say STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because those artists, they're going to help explain the value proposition of saving planet Earth. And it's crazy that we have to explain the value proposition of saving Starship Earth to other humans, because the value proposition of saving Starship Earth is that we get to exist as a species. So while it's super cool when we're talking about space, don't get too distracted by the satellites, by the rockets or the satellites. Think about that larger picture and what role you as a student will play in, preserving life here on Starship Earth.
No, I think, and that's really, really interesting. And speaking about how students can help, so many years ago, they used to only have, to the best of my knowledge, more like aerospace and defense. They didn't really have like space courses or curriculum around space. But now, if you look at so many of the different universities are offering, classes to prepare students for space, the space economy, the space tech, and looking at everything from, how do you build structures on Mars, or how do you make those lightweight materials that you can take, that you can ship from here versus the heavy stuff that's here on Earth. One of the things that I think, Samson, you just mentioned, I would like to say, just looking at my personal career track, I'm not a STEM student, but you don't have to be a STEM student to be part of any emerging industry, even space industry, right? Because you may not be an engineer, but you may be good in accounting, maybe good in business, marketing. There's all the other functions that come about, but know your passion first, and then your skill sets will work in the industry. So don't get discouraged if you're not a STEM student, but you can still be part of the space industry and help, get the word out or support it. And that kind of brings me, sorry, go ahead.
Me and George just had a nerd fight in front of a client from Space Force over whether or not computer science was a soft science or a hard science, because we were arguing over, I'm an anthropologist, he's a witch doctor who does economics. And so those are social science. And the gentleman from Space Force, they were doing something. And I was like, oh, you don't need an engineer. You need a social scientist, because part of that is how you shape the organization, how economics inform investment strategies, which investment strategies impact your organizational structure. Your organizational structure builds the culture of Space Force. And so part of this is there, if you're in India and you're part of India's space industry, how are you going to form yourself organizationally, and what kind of culture are you going to build? Because at the end of the day, culture eats strategy every time. How do you empower people to think and feel empowered? That's not an engineer's job. That's a social scientist job. So if you're not in the science, technology, engineering, or math, you're in one of the arts, you're 110% part of the space economy. You're 110% crucial to development of the larger space ecosystem and culture. So don't discredit your role, because you're probably going to actually end up leading these team of teams, because really smart technical people, sometimes they need someone with emotional intelligence to help lead them to awesomeness. So sorry for that brief thing, but George just agreed, because computer science is part of the hard scientists, and anthropologists are the best social scientists on the planet. Parna, what was your other question?
No, but all right, you know what, George, I'm going to let you respond before we go to the questions.
Well, I was going to, I'm not going to continue the debate for the benefit of everyone, but the definition of hard sciences is pretty hard and fast, and computer science is not on that list. So anyway, back to the real point here. Around education, I think something that's important, and this is why you've seen the increase in universities and colleges offering courses to help their students understand better what space commercialization, space businesses mean for their future is not just because they've probably been reading one of our forecasts or one of the other forecasts out there that talk about the future size of this economy, but also because there's an important conversation that says, even when you are in another business segment, even when you are in another industry, it is likely that you'll have to have situational awareness around how space and your reliance on space is impacting that industry. It is also likely that there will be opportunities for that industry to expand into a new vertical, pun intended, a new vertical, and have products and services that are offered through space industry or space economy partners. A couple of great examples are, we have talked to firms that are in the line of work of making component parts for helicopters and another one for race cars. Their ability to make precision parts to exact specifications using special types of metallurgy and or 3D printing are 100% applicable to the booming satellite and nanosat industry. So there are tons of other examples. We already geeked out about farm tech a little bit ago. So there's other great examples where people will have to be conscious of these. And so I think when you look forward to general course of study when it comes to business and economics, they will include a greater awareness among students needing to know what their companies, whether they start them themselves or work with others, will have to keep in mind for their risk considerations and opportunities as it relates to space.
Totally agree. And also look at the recent example, right? When we had the 6 civilians who went up in space and orbited there for 3 days. And one of them actually was, I think she was either a teacher or an artist, I can't remember, where she was like drawing like from the, while they were orbiting. And it was interesting because she was actually talking, it was not the regular pens and paintbrushes and all of that she took with her. There were like special pens that were designed with paints in it. And it was like fascinating to think. And yes, so there's an artist up there who's actually impacting some of the stuff that will be an everyday use that she's helping to come up with, right?
And Dr. C.M. Proctor is who you're speaking of, and I will humble brag that she is my phone. But Dr. C.M. Proctor is amazing. A. B. That's also where we first borrowed, with much license, the line that when you solve for space, you solve for Earth. So she's definitely at the forefront of that. Yes, she is an educator, and she was also an analog astronaut for quite some time, actually, on a number of missions before going up herself on that capsule. I think also, if you think about the economic growth that we're likely to see around analog astronaut training facilities and analog astronaut and related space simulators, that's going to be booming, right? Because right now the difference in cost between spending a week as an analog astronaut or in a space simulator compared to actually going to space yourself is still quite large. And so there are a number, I know of over 24 right now, different places where people can go on excursions and go on experiences where they can experience either space simulations or analog astronaut-like training and behavior and testing, which again comes back to benefiting us all, because that's how the things and the technologies and the procedures they're using up there get perfected first here on Earth, because making mistakes up there is pretty dangerous.
So let me pause for just one moment, because we have some questions here in the chat, partner, that we should probably talk to.
Yeah, I'm going to address that, but give me 2 minutes and I'll come back to that. Let me just bring it back to the original topic of India's role in the global space economy. I believe some of the recent numbers that I saw, but you guys are the numbers people, so you probably have more updated information. But it appears that currently India has about 2% of the global economy, but they want to make it somewhere in the 10 to 15% share of the overall market. I know when we were prepping for this, you guys had some really interesting predictions about what's what's going to be India's contribution to this amazing economy? Let's talk about that just once, and then we'll go to the questions if that's okay. Until then, guys, please please continue putting your questions in chat. Okay, thank you.
I'll go first on this one, but then I'll go first on this one, but I'll kick it over to Samson afterwards. So coming right up next year in Gandagar, there will be a massive expo. It's important because I believe it's called Defense Expo or Def Expo. This is going to be where you will see thousands of ambassadors, dignitaries, commercial, both space and aerospace and defense operators converging. When that happens, I believe that will be another turning point, another stone on the mountain, establishing India's presence in the future space economy. India has already done remarkable things on its own and in regards to its space program on a budget which is the fraction of that of NASA's, the Chinese, or the European Space Agency. And so if you were to think about your current space powers, it is already a short list. It is already a list that I would say includes India. If you look going forward at both the population growth and the GDP growth and dominance that India will likely have in the coming decades, it only makes sense that this will be happening under the same time period as the growth in space industrialization, space commercializations, and space economic activity, and that India will be one of the countries posed to take advantage of that. So those are my initial thoughts, but I know Samson has some others, so I'll defer.
India has a lot of brain power. So right now, really smart people from India tend to come to America. You're going to see a transition in that, particularly as folks from India who migrated to America in the 70s, 80s, and 90s have built substantial wealth in businesses, technical and business know-how, and they're going back to India. And so you're going to see a shift in your first option might not be to, hey, let's go from Mumbai to San Francisco. People in San Francisco don't want to be in San Francisco. If you've been following it here during the pandemic, there's been this huge migration of humans outside of San Francisco and New York to different in tech startup areas within America. And so when we see more businesses and people go online to conduct business, the reasoning why you're going from this side of the globe to this side of the globe is being further reduced. So as more Indians stay in India, more brain power. And if you look at the number of investment dollars from VCs and from the government that's going into the Indian ecosystem, when you're talking about the space economy, if we go back in time to 1993, and I'm telling you about the internet economy, your first question is, what's the internet? Then I tell you about the internet. Then you're like, yeah, that doesn't exist. And you're like, that's sort of true, it's 1993. But fast forward, if I say, hey, let's talk about the internet economy, you'd be like, we're gonna talk about Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, those trillion-dollar businesses that do business on the internet. And it's still part of the economy. We don't separate them. And so now when we talk about the space economy, people are like, oh yes, rockets, satellites, data, I get that. The difference is with the internet economy, that was born in Silicon Valley. With the space economy, it's looking for its Silicon Valley, and that race is still open. And so India has a good position in this race because of the amount of brain power and capital. Chandrayaan was the first mission to the moon, India's first mission to the moon. And whether or not you regard it as a success or not, it proved you have the technical capabilities on a very small budget to get there. And so what you'll see is in the relay race, that is the space race 2.0, as countries begin to partner off, you see that Russia and China and Saudi Arabia, they're going to build a base on the dark side of the moon. You'll also see that India will partner up with other countries who are space powers to help further advance their position in the space economy. I'm going to butcher George quote, but he says, you can't be a global power unless you are a space power. And the reason for that is if you want to be a dominant player on the globe and increase your GDP, increase your global presence, you've got to do it in space. And for this reason, and some other reasons, we see that India will be a leader in the space economy, so much so that probably in 4 or 5 generations, the universe's first quadrillionaire, that's a 1 with 15 zeros, will be from India. She will be from India. And of course, they're like, why is she from India? I'm like, the math says so, the brain power says so. And so we're looking, 4 generations out, what will India's position be in the global economy? It's a little bit of science, a little bit of magic, but we have the historical precedents to say, if these factors are met, here's a pretty probabilistic outcome.
So with all due respect to the men listening here today, we will still say it's going to be the woman from India who's going to lead the way. So yay, go girls. Let's start taking some questions now. Those are really great predictions. Thank you. So let's take Arnav's question first. So in legal terms, how exactly is land defined in space? Great question. And does this imply countries like the USA and Russia, who already have a strong foothold in space, could dominate space, leaving emerging countries with scraps? Ooh, I hope not. What do you guys think?
Yes, well, there was this document called the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which says, here's how we're going to regard outer space. That was most recently updated in 2019, 2020 with the Artemis Accords. The most interesting part of the Artemis Accords is who didn't sign it, because the other dominant, it was a document created by America. It does have some substantial signatories. Russia and China were like, we're not signing your piece of paper. So there's still a lot of ambiguity as to who can a country or a person or a business own the surface of the moon. And we're going to determine that whoever gets there first plants their flag and then defends said flag. It's probably who that's going to be. And so one of the things that I'm constantly saying is that if we colonize Moon or Mars, someone will have to kill the masters. We take the same isms that we have here on Earth and we just export them into space. That just means we're hairless apes that have really cool technology. We have lasers, but we're still, Neanderthals in the thought process for addressing our biases. George, you want to add anything to that?
I think that the norms of ownership of land in space have yet to be determined. What is on paper, as we've already talked about, is terrestrial, and we're not bringing paper with us to space. So when we talk about norms of behavior, that is different from what are policies, what are international documents that have signatories. That's not the same thing as the norms and how other countries choose to act, either in their own self-interested way or perhaps in random and rogue ways and blow up their own satellites. But I'm sure we'll get to that anyway. So yeah, I think that is TBD, that is to be determined. I would like to think that we will come together and that there is plenty of seats at such a large table of resources and land for many, many countries to participate. But I do think that is yet to be determined. And many of that will be based on which nations are the future global powers, because those are the same nations that are the future space powers.
I just want to add to that is that question also highlights the role of lawyers and policymakers in the space economy. So if you're not an engineer, but you're going to be a solicitor, a barrister, or a lawyer, you have a role in space economy.
Perfect. Let's take the next question from Sanskruti. We just had a session on sustainability and ESG. So I can't help but wonder what the environmental impacts are of the skyrocketing growth of the space economy. Are there any effective regulations in place to moderate the environmental impacts? That's
George. I'm going to put myself on mute. George, limit yourself to 2 minutes for this reply. I've sat through some White House briefings he's given on this, on ESG. So no more than 2 minutes, George. Go.
Okay, so all of the monitoring, I'll rephrase the word all, never say all and never, right? The vast majority of the monitoring information and ability to respond to what's happening on Earth as it relates to weather, climate, environmental impact, deforestation, predation, loss of wildlife and diversity of animals in their kingdoms, all of that is enabled through our reliance on satellites. When it comes to launches, there is a couple things to think about here. The first is it is very likely that the people and various dignitaries who fly there on commercial and private aircraft to go see said launch are actually contributing more, are actually contributing more than the launch itself is. The equipment that they're putting up is not only invaluable and helps us with the monitoring assessment of what's happening here on Earth, there's also a number of enabling features. So the first is that and again, I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. So you have UN SDGs, and then the US, sometimes we call them ESGs. I know these are a different set of initials for environmental, social and good governance, and then UN SDGs are sustainable development goals. I know they're different, but I think for our conversations, we're fine to talk about them interchangeably. If you look at those and the amount of money going into those, which is also in the order of billions and trillions of dollars, and yes, we like to talk about billions and trillions a lot in space, but here on Earth, when you're talking about the billions and trillions of dollars going into these forms of remediation and these forms of targeted investment, that money is not going to be given blindly. The only way you are going to track said dollars to see if these alternative energy facilities are being built, these forests are actually being planted or protected, and even these waters are being cleaned up or wildlife protected is through, again, our reliance on the data that satellites are providing to us. I think one of the very interesting projects, and I know I'm past 2 minutes, but one of the really interesting projects right now is people are using satellite and GPS to ring fence a particular island, which has a endangered bird population. They have then NFT'd and created a digital twin of all of these endangered birds. And then using that technology layer, they're then able to go out and raise funds for the preservation of these birds and monitor the lifespan and the habitat of all of them. So there's some real next level stuff happening, but all of that technology relies on a backbone, which is our information grid, our GPS and positioning reliance that comes from space. I'll stop there.
All right. I'm sure that's a topic that we can continue the conversation all day.
Yeah. Prince William's wrong. That's the punchline.
All right, let's take our next question. It's around space economy being a landscape where startups are emerging. How does a prospective investor analyze startups in space since it's emerging, which is a good question, and what financial metrics are they using to analyze that?
I'll give you the short answer very carefully. George has, and you can call George. So space is hard. Space is always trying to kill you, and getting to space is very hazardous because sometimes rockets blow up. And so it's not the easiest way. The other thing you need to know about investing in this space, it's patient capital, because more often than not, you're looking at a 10 to 15 year horizon before you make a dollar, before any dollars can be made, actually. And so there's numerous factors that go into space. And so the best thing we do when we're looking at space businesses, you're developing technology for space. How is it applied here on Earth before you even get up to space? And so we have here in America, we have what's called SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research Grants, SBIT, where you have the businesses, the startups, they're developing quote unquote space technology, but it's actually applicable here on Earth even before you get it to space. And that's where you're going to get your first dollar. So you want to really look at what technologies are being developed right here on Earth that can be applicable into space. And I'll let George tell you about one or two examples in under 2 minutes.
So first, I will mention Health Reel, started by one of our friends, a former American football, what do you tackle, football star. He has gone about the technology transfer process of bringing some of NASA's technology around the algorithms for monitoring health data of astronauts and applied this to a next generation fitness app. It's pretty amazing. That is an example of something that was a technology developed obviously for monitoring the health and well-being of astronauts that is now being used commercially for people who want to lose that COVID-19 pound picked up. I don't know who that might be, but I've heard someone did. Also, in reference to another firm, I would mention Orbit's Edge. Orbit's Edge is a firm that works on using edge computing solutions for rugged, hard environments to include the most hazardous of all environments, which is space. Newsflash, there's other places that we need rugged, hard computing and advanced computing that also are not super friendly, maybe like deserts, just saying. So for both of those, they're example of technologies that have applications above the Earth, but also applications here on Earth. I can also think of another one, which is Aquifer. They have a solution which helps for the purification systems on the ISS. This is super important because nearly more than 95% of all of the air and water is recycled on the space station. That means that all of that equipment needs to be kept super clean. People have been really big about keeping stuff clean lately. I don't know why, maybe we can guess. And so that also has a lot of applications here on Earth in healthcare facilities, and they've also been tapping into that market over the last 18 months. So those are just three examples, but all three of those I think are good demonstrations of the types of firms people would want to look at as examples, not telling you to invest in any of those, but the types of firms people want to look at because they all have technologies that are enabling things in space, but also have applications here on Earth that present themselves for ready commercialization opportunities. And again, if your business isn't in the business of generating money, you're not going to be in business long, and you're not going to have many happy investors.
So I just want to add to that, because when we talk about your financial metrics, George just sort of summarized, if your business isn't in the business of making money, if you can't do it on Earth, don't worry about doing it in space. But the other part is we didn't mention is that we're talking to Dr. Gonzalez. She's out in California. She's also an analog astronaut. And we're talking about how the secret to immortality probably lies in microgravity. Your cells under 1G, 1 gravity, they're pushed down. When you get to microgravity, they expand. And so in this expansion, there's some amazing science to be had. And so we're already able, through a technique called CRISPR and gene editing and 3D printing for organic or biological materials. Most time we think 3D printing, we think, buildings are, pieces of robotics, but 3D printing also applies to biology. And so there are many firms who are looking at how does microgravity, where cells expand and behave differently, how does that facilitate the creation, the growth of various type of deep tissue organs. So you have NASA Centennial Challenge program, who's teamed up with the Methuselah Project to, right now, I think it's a $500,000 award to who can demonstrate how their ability to grow deep tissue organs works in space. And when someone cracks the secret to immortality, meaning, hey, this technique allows us to replace your organs every 50 to 100 years, people will incrementally live longer. And so this is where, when you're thinking about how do you determine the value of these startups, we're going to proof the tech in space, but then what's the market for pancreases, livers, corneas, hearts, and different organs here on Earth? And so this is where some of it sounds future tech, but we're already there. It's already part of the fourth industrial revolution. And by the time in the next 2 decades, when the fifth industrial revolution is well developed, you will see that there are as many medical scientists and researchers in space and the space economy than there are quote unquote astronauts.
I think there's an additional thought there that's worth sharing, which is when we look at why we have between 6 and a dozen commercial space stations in orbit in the next 10 years, it is because that these industrial parks will be filled with biotech and medical firms, in addition to firms working on industrial applications and science and development. I mention this because imagine 5 or 10 years from now, when you're on the board at ABC Pharmaceutical and your competitor just perfected a new gene folding or protein folding technique for the development of a brand new drug, which is the next Lipitor or Viagra, billions of dollars of market. And they tapped into it because of their presence on a commercial space station with the space they're leasing and their ability to perfect that and then commercialize that. That's going to be a very awkward board meeting for you, because their question is, why aren't we on a space station? Why aren't we doing that same research that Merck's doing? There's going to be one answer, which is you're probably fired. And well, you throw someone on the bus. That's what you should do. But anyway, you'll probably be fired. But then the new crew is going to leave some space on a space station. This is going to be the killer app, the hair on fire problem that I believe brings us from 6 to a dozen space stations to many, many space stations, or perhaps connected space stations that are quite larger than what we normally conceive of. It could go either way. I think also pointing out there, and Sam, sorry, I mentioned a little bit, but in the US alone, and I apologize, I don't have global figures for this, but in the US alone, the organ shortage and organ replacement market has a $50 billion unmet need. So I'm putting it in dollar terms, not because I'm not trying to value each individual human life, but as an economist, think about it in dollar terms. That's a $50 billion market that is prepared to pay for additional surgeries, additional implants, and additional replacements for human parts that we just don't have. If we can have better techniques for doing these things, or new methods to even grow our own in space, there's already an unmet need that can be tapped into by the right commercial entity.
That's for 5% of the world's population, by the way.
I had a question, Ms. Parna, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Could you want to put it in chat?
Ma'am, it's a long question, and I also have to quote an article written by Mr. Pallins and Mr. Williams. It'll just take I'd like to quote an article that I read in the Financial Express. I apologize, I don't know the original source. The space economy is much like the internet economy. Every day, we use the internet and enjoy the vast ecosystems, industries, specialities, and places it takes us, even though we have never actually been to the internet. Now, as a student of finance, taxation, and accounting, I really don't contribute or curate the internet, but the internet is a huge part of my life. So do you see the space economy doing something similar in the next 20 years, let's say?
Samson, you want to take that? You're on mute.
I do 100%. I do have to say that he's quoting an article that we wrote that's in the Financial Times, Financial Express of India. I get super excited because even if you're in taxation, when we talk about in accounting, when we talk about what is the currency of space, we're really talking about periodic table element stable coins. And that's based off of, as we mine resources in space, the reason we're not taking paper money to space, it weighs too much, paper weighs too much, but we'll have an entirely new ecosystem of space and monetary system of space based upon the commodities that we mine in space. So even though you've never been to the internet, we're on it right now. this connection is facilitated probably by a satellite, so that Washington, D.C., where we're at, and Mumbai can communicate and talk about this amazing opportunity in the future of the thing that we're currently using, even though we don't consciously think, oh yes, every day I go to space. I'm like, yes, every day you do go to space. So George.
Also, as a student of the accounting profession, if you have an interest, I know that we have done a couple different series for the Accounting Professionals Association, both in the US and in the UK. I think those videos are readily available, but if not, just reach out and I'll make sure to send you the link so that you could watch those. But we talk about the many different applications that space industrial advancement has for the accounting profession when it comes to both their auditing transparency requirements, but also the way that risk can be measured differently using some of these assets. So it's interesting. It's probably a sidebar, but I'm happy to share those with you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. That would be great. And apologies for the long question. Thanks.
No worries at all. Thank you for the question. And I just wanted to say, just going back to the last conversation about startups, this is actually what I was looking at in my Forbes article, are, some of the near-term stuff. It's less, like even companies like Fitbit, for example, when you're in space, it's great, your heart rate is fast or you're not doing so great. So then what do you do until the hospitals are built, right? So there again, the smaller things about living, breathing, and of course, all the large stuff that George and Samson has been talking about. So I think we have 2 minutes left. So why don't I ask each of you, please? I know time flies, right? I'm sorry we don't have any more time for questions, but do reach out to us on LinkedIn and do stay in touch. And if you're here in the US, definitely, ping us. I don't want to speak for you guys. I would love to meet you all. So what tip do you have for students who are looking to engage in the space economy now or in the future?
George, you go first.
George.
Talk 2 minutes, 1 minute rather. You're on mute, George.
I think the best thing that students can do right now is develop an awareness of how space industrialization, commercialization, and space economic development will have impacts on any field that you go into within any industrial class. So whether you are pursuing accounting, you're pursuing management information systems, marketing, whatever the case may be, there will be a need for those businesses that you are either starting yourself or that you are consulting for to have an awareness of space and the space domain. That is not something that the current employees will possess because they grew up with the internet economy. You're coming up and getting your education during a period of the space economy. And so there will be large value add opportunities for yourself as you show businesses how they can diversify their product line with additional opportunities for space industry touch points, or they can use partnerships with firms already doing that to leverage their brand. So I think those are the very quick value adds that'll happen. In addition to that, just always keep learning and always keep your eyes out for valuable space economy commercialization information. Our podcasts are and our YouTubes are all completely free. We put them out there as an e-learning service because we, at our heart, we're both educators, and we think that it's important that everyone understands more about this field and these opportunities as they arise.
Samson?
Here we go. Everyone can be a space expert, a space economist expert, because there's like less than a dozen on the globe. So start now, start publishing, start talking about it, start building your canon of knowledge. Connect with us on LinkedIn, tag us in posts, because right now there is a dearth of economists who are focused on the space economy. That's the first thing that'll be very helpful. Number two, we had a couple of questions about space debris. That's going to be a thorn in everyone's side because we absolutely got to figure that out. If for whatever reason you're blowing up your satellites to create more space debris, that's probably a bad idea. You'll understand why in the next 3 to 5 years when you can't actually launch a vehicle safely. And Riddy, you brought up a very important question. Do you think there is a case to be made for the space economy being another cause for the global north-south divide? 100%. We wrote a book, race in space, racial equity and justice in the space economy. We definitely do not want to colonize space because that just takes all of our isms into a different landscape. And so this is where the policymakers, the lawyers, et cetera, can really help shape how should we regard this new ecosystem that we're now aware of called the space economy. It's very similar to how we're trying to now, 30 years after the fact, trying to figure out what to do with the internet and the businesses that operate on the internet. So let's learn from that to prepare for the future.
Excellent points. And for me, it's keep dreaming, because stuff that we saw in Star Trek and Star Wars is actually becoming reality today. So don't stop dreaming. Thank you so much for having us, Sart. I know we have gone a couple of minutes over, but thank you all for being here. Do let us know if you have any questions, and good luck with your endeavors in the future.
Awesome. Have a great evening, y'all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams, Mr. Pullen, and Ms. Basu for investing your time with us today. This session was truly phenomenal and thoroughly engaging. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the attendees when I say the past hour has been quite thought-provoking and insightful for us. On behalf of Team Intent, I would like to extend our heartiest thanks to you for graciously taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today and conduct this session. It was a privilege and an honor to learn from you all about the space economy. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Design Board, for providing us support with the virtual platform. With that, we come to an end of this conference. To delivering a closing note, I would invite my Intent's president, Ashish Mehta.
Okay, am I audible? All right.
Yes,
Yeah. So thank you very much, students, teachers, esteemed speakers. It gives me, Ashish Mehta, a great pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks at the end of our first international conference. But I really believe that this is not an end, and it is a beginning of a new era, especially when we are discussing about the space economy and how the world is now expanding its horizons and going outside to a place that was kind of unimaginable maybe a couple of decades before. And obviously our theme is also envisioning the next gen world, so it is right in line with that. So as you all witness, this event for 2 days has been a massive success, and we hope that all the participants, all the audience members have gained a greater insight to the various topics. We hope to come back with another international conference, many more events. So once again, thank you very much. I would like to call upon Amisha Joshi, who's the Vice President of Intent and also Chief Coordinator for the International Conference. Hi, Amisha.
Hello, I'm audible.
Yep.
Okay. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, honorable authorities and speakers and my fellow faculty members. I would like to thank you everyone to make this conference successful. And on behalf of Team Intent, I appreciate all the guests from across the globe and different walks of life who came here to share their knowledge and vast experience with us. And also a special thanks to Vaishali ma'am for her support and guidance throughout the event. Also would like to thank and congratulate Kavya and Sanskruti and to the whole IR team for working so hard and to make this conference happen. And thanks to whole Team Intent. So we hope to come back with another international conference and many more events. So once again, thank you all. Thank you so much.
I would like to request everybody to switch on their cameras so that we can take a group picture with our speakers. All right. Okay, everyone, quickly just switch on your cameras and we can just be together in the same screen. All right. So take the picture on the count of 3. If anybody is left to switch on their cameras, please do it quickly or you get left out. Okay, so on 3, 1, 2, 3. That's a lovely pose. All right, thank you very much for joining, guys. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Stay happy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, guys.